let me just move a little bit to the West Bank. I think throughout 2024, my assumption had always been that the Trump administration was going to formally acknowledge the West Bank as part of Israel as the sovereign over the West Bank. That was, I think, clearly what Miriam Adelson wanted most in giving Trump more than $100 million for his campaign. Mike Huckabee, the now ambassador to Israel, explicitly advocates that. So does Elise Stefanik, the UN ambassador. What we're now seeing in the West Bank is obviously a very significant escalation of bombing and killing, and not ready to yet say that they're doing to the West Bank what they did to Gaza, but if it continued to escalate, you would start entering a territory of that kind. What do you think is the current Israeli intention and the American intention with respect to the West Bank?
Okay, I want to back up a minute. I'm going to get right to your question, but just back up. And I'll say something that's heretical, and people, of course, can disagree with me. In itself, there's nothing intrinsically or morally wrong with what Trump is proposing, although the language is very crude and heartless. It was recognized for a very long time that the resolution of the Palestinian refugee question, and 70% of the people in Gaza constitute refugees or descendants of refugees. It was recognized that there were going to be three possibilities for resolving what's called the Palestinian refugee question. One would be exercise of the right of return. And if you look at the negotiations closely, as I have, the consensus seemed to be that that particular option would be minimal. The numbers put forth by the Palestinian negotiators at the various diplomatic attempts to resolve the conflict, be it Camp David in 2000, be it the Annapolis negotiations in 2007. If you looked at the numbers that the Palestinians were throwing around, they put the numbers somewhere around 500,000 Palestinians would be repatriated to Israel over a 10-year period. The number of actual refugees and descendants, the figure is usually put at roughly, these are all rough numbers, so don't hold me to it. I'm not out of the ballpark, but I have the numbers. I know the numbers, so I'm giving you rough numbers because the ranges are wide. But we're talking about 6 million refugees who have the refugee status, of whom the Palestinians were throwing around numbers, sometimes 200,000, sometimes 800,000. But next to the bulk of the problem, we're not really talking about a significant number. The second possibility was that the Palestinians would be resettled in the place where they currently live. So most of the Palestinian refugees are living in Lebanon, some in Syria, Jordan, a large number. So they would be resettled there with some sort of financial compensation. And the third possibility was called resettlement in a third country. So countries like Canada were mentioned, countries like Australia were mentioned. Those were the three possibilities. So when Trump says the Palestinians will want to leave because of the, presumably he means the financial incentives, in addition, of course, to the crude force, or brute force, it's not totally out to lunch statement to make. Now, how people choose between those three options, that's up to them. though, as I said, the Palestinian negotiators seem to suggest there would be a cap on those returning to Israel itself. Some Palestinians suggested if you give us a system of graduated incentives, if you return to Israel, you'll get X amount of money compensation. If you stay in the country where you're currently residing, you'll get Y amount of compensation, more than X or X plus. And then if you go to a third country, it'll be X plus plus, that you can have a voluntary resolution of the refugee question. And that strikes me as perfectly plausible. The problem, as I see it, is this, that Israel is, as B'Tselem, the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories, Israel is a Jewish supremacist state. And it wants a purely Jewish state. It doesn't want non-Jews. It doesn't even want Goyim. It doesn't, they think they're better, that they should rule the world, but only Jews, a Jewish supremacist state. And so let us say that Trump, the so-called Trump plan, though there's no plan, it's just the pronouncement. Let's say the Trump pronouncement metamorphoses into a plan. Then what's going to happen? You quote unquote solve the Gaza question. But then what does that going to mean? Then you're going to have the West Bank question. And what's the solution to the West Bank question? Well, from the point of view of Israel, there's only one solution: to leave, like the people in Gaza. And then you have the question of the Arabs in Israel. And how do you solve that question? And so, to my mind, the main problem with this notion of deportation of the Arabs in Gaza, the Palestinian Arabs in Gaza, the main problem is it's going to open up a Pandora's box, because then they're going to look for the same solution in the West Bank. As the cliche has it, the hunger increases with each bite. They won't be satisfied with anything less than an Arab Rhine, R-E-I-N, as in Judenrein, an Arab Rhine West Bank, and then an Arab Rhine Israel. They will not accept anything less.
But just on that, you have this pressure. I'm not sure how much the Israelis or the Americans care. I don't think very much. But this idea that very shortly, or essentially now, you have an apartheid situation because between the river and the sea, the number of Arabs outnumber the number of Jews. If you were to transfer out the 2 million people in Gaza, at the very least, that alleviates the problem for the moment, because now you've taken 2 million Arabs out. And I don't know, maybe the Israelis, the Israeli Jews, believe they can tolerate a minority Arab population as long as they get to rule over them. The problem becomes when they become the majority, and then either they have democratic rights or you have an apartheid situation. So perhaps just depopulating Gaza of Arabs solves that problem for the moment.
I never quarrel with facts. I think there is an argument to be made there. But I also believe that there is this very pronounced tendency in Israeli society to make the whole place pure. You have to remember, in Nazi Germany, Jews were only 1% of the German population. There were 60 million, my memory is, I think 60 million Germans, 60 or now I can't remember, but it was only 1%. But that was 1% too many for the Nazi ideology. And I think any percentage, short of a trivial number, any percentage for the Israelis is too much. It's 1 Arab too many, 10 Arabs too many. It's if you read, as I have done in the past few months, if you read the explosion of sheer uh, sure, racial derangement in Israeli society, the glee, the joy, the euphoria they have carried on with in the extermination of the people of Gaza. Just the postings on their social media, it's a genuine sight to behold. And I am not sure whether it hasn't reached or plumbed a depth well beyond Nazi Germany, even in the years of war, the peak when the Germans started to lose the war and they blamed the whole loss on the Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy. So you're constantly bombarded every day in Nazi Germany that our soldiers are dying, they're freezing on the Russian front, they're freezing to death on the Russian front, and all of this is because of the Judeo-Bolshevik conspiracy. And that was the only thing they heard. Remember, Germany was a totalitarian state. I suppose some people heard the BBC with what was called back then a short wave radio. Maybe some did, but probably only a handful. But I don't believe, judging from what I've seen, and the evidence is very thin because it was a totalitarian state, it was very difficult to measure what's called public opinion in those circumstances. But and you have to remember, as I'm sure you know, formally, at any rate, the Nazi genocide was kept out of public view. Now, of course, most people who wanted to know knew enough horrors were happening because 50% of the Jews killed during World War II were not killed in the death camps. They were just lined up and shot down. So enough soldiers witnessed enough and they heard the story. So they knew enough to know something horrible was happening. How much they knew about the gas chambers, I don't think there's any. I stopped studying it 20 years ago, and there's probably been a vast proliferation of scholarship in the subject. But I knew the literature quite well as of 20 years ago. There wasn't much knowledge in how much the Germans knew. But this is a totally different thing in Israel. This is every night on the evening talk shows. The social media is saturated with soldiers boasting in glee about the crimes they're committing in Gaza. So this country is so completely unhinged that I'm not certain they'll tolerate any Arab presence, or if they tolerate it, it will be the same way as we tolerate in our country a Black presence in the American South, namely the conditions being unlivable. And here I would want to make a distinction. You call it an apartheid regime, and it's been called by many people an apartheid regime, but there is a slight, a not trivial difference. The South Africans wanted the Black population. That was their working population. They wanted to confine them technically to Bantustans, but most of the Blacks, they may have a passport that says you belong to Transkei, Ciskei, Bofu Botswana, and all the other Bantustans, but they didn't live in the Bantustans. They lived in encampments because they were working in South Africa, and they were wanted. Israel doesn't want them to work there. It wants them gone. So even if you reduced the Gaza population, I still think there will be, and so the demographic problem is solved to some extent. I still think you're going to have this kind of juggernaut, this ideological juggernaut to drive all the subhumans, the Untermenschen, the subhumans, out of all of Israel. And then you're going to have the pressures on the land. They want the land. So even if the demographic problem is solved, the land problem remains. They want the land. Dunham by Dunham, they want to take over all the land, not especially, but at a greater even degree in places like East Jerusalem, which still puts you on a collision course. So I consider the so-called Trump plan, the real horror of the plan is it will legitimize the complete ethnic cleansing of that area. And if Israel gets its way, it'll be ethnic cleansing of parts of Syria, ethnic cleansing of parts of Lebanon. These people they're completely mad. It's an unhinged society. It's a freakish society, in my opinion. When you actually read these statements coming out of that place.
Yeah, I think one of the moments that opened a lot of people's eyes was when those Israeli soldiers were caught on video gang raping helpless Palestinian detainees, many of whom had never even been charged with a crime. And you had a discourse that immediately emerged that rape of Palestinians, gang rape of Palestinians, is justifiable. You had marches in defense of those soldiers outside of where they had been detained, including by members of the Knesset, demanding they had been released on the ground they did nothing wrong. You go and have any kind of person on the street interview in Israel and you ask about the number of children who have been killed in Gaza, and they'll simply say, who cares? It's almost like a universal answer. It's a culture and a society that has become, obviously not universally, but overwhelmingly, completely inured and in denial of the humanity of everybody other than of Jews. In times like these, as we just demonstrated, uncertainty is the only certainty, from geopolitical risks like the ones we've seen in Israel and Ukraine, both of which risk destabilizing global markets, to the Fed's nonstop money printing. It's hard to feel secure about your financial future. Since 2020, the US dollar has lost 24% of its buying power, and with inflation rising and government debt ballooning, your hard-earned savings are at risk. That's why I trust Lear Capital to help me understand the benefits of gold and silver, physical assets that hold their value in turbulent times. Lear has educated me on how one might go about diversifying into gold and therefore give a person and their family control over their financial security. With their helpful guides, you can understand how to take possession of various high-value metals, store them safely, or roll over your IRA or 401k tax and penalty-free. It's easy to get started. Call Lear Capital today at 800-920-8388 or visit leargreenwald.com for your free wealth protection guide. They've got loads of reports to help you understand the current political and economic landscape, and I really recommend them. Here's a special offer for my viewers. You can get a $500 credit toward delivery, storage, or IRA fees with your qualifying purchase. Learn how you can protect your future. Call Lear today at 800-920-8388. That's 800-920-8388, or go to leargreenwald.com. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.